Jack Ellison was never one to shy away from the quieter life. He had been stationed on the orbital mining colony for nearly 2 years now, far from the bustling centers of galactic civilization. The space station, Station Zeta-15, was small, mostly consisting of miners and engineers, with a few traders and off-duty soldiers. There was a rhythm to life here, a simple, predictable routine. Jack liked it that way. The occasional spark of excitement, like a supply ship arriving, was enough for him. On this particular evening, Jack was busy in the maintenance bay, tightening the bolts on an old mining drone. The hum of the station's machinery was the only sound, a comforting white noise. His hands moved instinctively, working with the kind of ease that came with years of experience. Jack didn't have any big plans for the night. A simple dinner, some relaxation, and maybe a few rounds of cards with the guys. But all that changed when the station's communication system buzzed with an urgent signal. Unidentified craft approaching, came the voice of the station's head officer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Lieutenant Rajiv. Her tone was clearly alarmed, but Jack wasn't sure why. The station received ships all the time, mostly supply freighters or travelers passing through. There was nothing out of the ordinary about it. "Get to the observation deck, now," she ordered, her voice crackling through the intercom. Curious, Jack set down the drone's tool and headed for the deck. As he walked down the narrow hallways, the station's automated lights flickered on, illuminating the path ahead. It was a long walk to the observation deck, but Jack didn't mind. It gave him time to think. Maybe the ship that was approaching was something special, or maybe it was just another freighter. As he reached the observation bay, Jack was greeted by a sight that instantly took his breath away. A ship? No, not just any ship, hovered outside the station. It was enormous, its hull glowing with an otherworldly blue light that pulsed gently. The ship's design was elegant, with swirling, spiral-like patterns across its surface. It wasn't anything from human technology. That much was obvious. Its size and shape reminded Jack of some of the old stories about the legendary Galacha, a species known for their incredible technology and complex social structures. The Galacha were mysterious, hardly ever seen in this part of the galaxy. But the ship outside, that had their signature all over it. The doors to the observation deck slid open, and Lieutenant Rajiv stepped inside. She looked a bit flustered, which was unusual for her. "Jack," she said, her voice sharp, "I need you to stay close. We have a very special visitor." Jack raised an eyebrow, but before he could ask more, the observation doors opened again. This time, a figure walked through. A tall, regal woman with skin that shimmered like a translucent gemstone. Her hair was silver, flowing, and glowed faintly with an ethereal light. The woman wore a flowing robe that seemed to ripple like the surface of water, and her eyes were sharp, almost piercing. She had the unmistakable air of someone in command. This was no ordinary alien. This was Granddaughter, one of the highest-ranking members of the Galacha people. "Greetings, humans," Gratha said, her voice deep and smooth, yet carrying an undeniable authority. She looked directly at Lieutenant Rajiv, who stiffened, clearly unsure how to respond. Jack, on the other hand, couldn't hide his curiosity. He'd read about the Galacha in the old space history books. They were powerful, highly intelligent, and rarely interacted with other species unless necessary. "Granddaughter," Rajiv said finally, bowing her head slightly. "What brings you to Station Zeta-15?" Gratha smiled, a knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She turned her gaze toward Jack, and his stomach did an unexpected flip. She had noticed him. "I come on a personal matter," Gratha said, stepping closer to Jack. "And you, young human, are the key." Jack blinked in surprise. "Me?" "Yes, you." Gratha's voice was soft, but firm. "I have spent a long time studying the compatibility of various species for my granddaughter's future. After much deliberation, I have decided that you are perfect for her." Jack felt his jaw drop. "Wait a minute. What?" The room went silent, Jack could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, a faint ringing in the back of his mind. Gratha was still looking at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, nor was it excitement. It was expectation. "I don't understand," Jack said, shaking his head. "You want me to be perfect for your granddaughter, but we've never even met." Gratha nodded slowly. "The Galacha are a long-lived people, and we do not make such decisions lightly. I have studied your species, your emotions, your history, your potential, and I have determined that you, Jack Ellison, are the ideal match for my granddaughter, HFY. Jack's mind was racing. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A prank. The whole station was in on it, and he was the punchline. But Gratha didn't look like she was joking. "So what exactly am I supposed to do?" Jack asked, his voice still thick with confusion. "You will meet Scifi," Gratha said simply. "I will bring her here shortly. And from there, we will see how things unfold." Jack could only nod, still stunned by the situation. He had no idea what he was getting into, but one thing was certain: his life was about to change forever. As Gratha turned and walked toward the airlock, Jack stood still, processing everything. An alien grandmother had just told him he was perfect for her granddaughter. And somehow, he felt like the weirdest adventure of his life had only just begun. The hum of the station's machinery echoed in Jack's ears as he stood in the observation bay, still trying to wrap his mind around what had just happened. Gratha Vakoro, a high-ranking Galacha matriarch, had just declared him the perfect match for her granddaughter. The words felt surreal, like a strange dream he couldn't wake up from. Jack glanced around the observation deck. The station's crew had gathered in a semicircle, their murmurs filling the space. Lieutenant Rajiv stood to the side, looking just as puzzled as Jack felt. The Galacha were not known for their casual visits. They were a species of power and precision, their technology far more advanced than anything humanity had ever developed. And now, Gratha was saying that Jack, a simple mechanic, far from any center of power, was the one she had chosen. What in the stars just happened? Jack muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. He didn't expect a response, but a voice did answer. "You're not the only one who's confused, Jack." Lieutenant Rajiv stepped forward, her expression tight. "But I think you'd better get used to it. When someone like Gratha Vakoro says something, it's not something you ignore." Jack turned to look at her, his brow furrowing. "But why me? I mean, I'm just a guy working on broken-down drones. What does she want with me?" Rajiv gave him a look that said he was missing the obvious. "We don't get to choose who they pick, Jack. It's like a special kind of matchmaking. The Galacha are very careful with their decisions. There's something about you, something she sees that we can't. I've read about this in history. The Galacha don't choose lightly." Before Jack could ask more, Gratha's voice rang out, her presence drawing everyone's attention. "You will meet Scifi soon. She is on her way now." Jack blinked. "Wait, what?" The mention of Scifi, Gratha's granddaughter, made his stomach flutter. He hadn't even had a chance to process this entire situation, and now he was going to meet the very person he was supposed to be compatible with. What if they didn't like each other? What if she thought he was some kind of joke? "She is not far," Gratha continued, not waiting for Jack to respond. "It is time for you to meet her. I will leave you both to your first meeting. Make it count." And just like that, Gratha turned and walked down the hallway, her robes flowing behind her like ripples in a pond. Jack stared after her, still stunned, unsure whether this was real life or some kind of bizarre dream. "Well," Jack muttered to himself, shaking his head, "here goes nothing." He followed the lieutenant to the docking bay, where they awaited the arrival of Scifi. The wait felt like an eternity. Jack fidgeted with his hands, nervously glancing around. What was he supposed to say to someone like Scifi, someone who was part of the mighty Galacha lineage? What if he said something stupid? He was a simple man with simple tastes. He couldn't imagine what a powerful, elegant being like Cesia would see in him. As he stood there, unsure of himself, he heard a soft chime and looked up. A shimmering blue light enveloped the bay, and a figure materialized before him. Cesia was tall, her figure elegant and graceful. Her skin glowed with a subtle blue sheen, and her eyes, large and striking, reflected the light of the station around them. Her silver hair cascaded down her back, shifting like liquid metal. She was beautiful, no doubt about it. But what struck Jack most was how distant she seemed. There was an air of perfection about her, a kind of unapproachable beauty that made him feel even more out of place than he already did. Cesia didn't speak immediately. She simply observed Jack, her gaze cool and calculating. Jack shifted uncomfortably under her stare, unsure of how to proceed. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy, until Cesia finally spoke. "You are Jack Ellison," she said, her voice calm and measured. It wasn't exactly a question, more of a statement. "The one my grandmother has chosen for me." Jack nodded awkwardly. Yeah, that's me. But I don't really know why she chose me, to be honest. I mean, I'm just a mechanic. I fix things." Cecia's eyes narrowed slightly, though she maintained a polite smile. "A mechanic, you say? How interesting." She took a step closer, her steps light, almost floating. "And what exactly do you fix, Jack Ellison?" "Mostly drones," he replied, struggling to maintain his composure. "Mining drones, cargo drones, stuff like that." Cecia tilted her head slightly, clearly intrigued. "So you understand machines well." Jack blinked, caught off guard by her tone. "I guess you could say that. I mean, I've spent years fixing everything from small parts to the big machines. It's not glamorous, but it works." For a moment, there was silence again. Jack couldn't read Cesia. She didn't seem impressed, but she wasn't dismissive either. Her face was an unreadable mask. "How do you feel about your life, Jack?" Cecia asked after a long pause. "Do you wish for more than this? Simplicity?" Jack stared at her, taken aback by the question. He didn't know how to answer. He liked his life. It was simple, yes, but it was his. He wasn't sure what Cesia was looking for, but her prodding question felt like a test. "I don't know," Jack said finally. "I've never really thought about it. I like the quiet. But I guess I don't know what I'd do without it. I'm not much for all that fancy stuff. I just like fixing things and keeping things running." Cecia studied him for a moment longer, and Jack felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. Finally, she nodded slowly, as though reaching a conclusion in her mind. "Very well," she said softly, her voice just above a whisper. "We shall see how this goes." And with that, Jack's heart raced. He wasn't sure what she meant, but he knew one thing for certain. The next chapter of his life had just begun, and it was going to be a lot more complicated than he ever imagined. The first few minutes after Cecia arrived were some of the most awkward of Jack's life. He couldn't help but feel like he was walking on thin ice. Here he was, a simple human mechanic, facing off against one of the most advanced and sophisticated beings he had ever met. Cecia Vekoro, the granddaughter of Gratha, a woman from a species far beyond anything Jack had ever imagined. Cecia stood before him with an air of grace, her piercing eyes studying him with silent judgment. It wasn't hostile, but it certainly wasn't friendly. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't frowning either. Her expression was neutral, unreadable. Jack shifted his weight from one foot to the other, trying to hide how nervous he was. "So, it's nice to meet you, Cecia," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He immediately wished he hadn't said it. That was a dumb thing to say. Of course it was nice to meet her. Who wouldn't want to meet the granddaughter of a powerful Galacha matriarch? Cecia didn't answer right away. She simply nodded, giving Jack a cool, almost regal look. "Likewise," she said, her voice calm and smooth. It wasn't an enthusiastic greeting, but it wasn't cold either. They stood in silence for a moment, and Jack could feel the tension thickening in the air. What was he supposed to do now? What did Granddaughter expect from him? Was he supposed to be charming? To impress Cecia with his personality? He had no idea what she wanted or how to talk to her. So, Jack began again, trying to break the silence. What brings you to Station Zeta 15? I mean, I know you're here because of your grandmother, but is there something else? Cecia glanced at him, as if considering whether to respond. I came here because my grandmother asked me to, she said simply, her voice steady. As for why, well, that is a matter I will discuss with you later. Jack blinked. That was it? She wasn't going to explain herself. Right, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. He had expected some kind of explanation or maybe a conversation about what this whole matchmaking business was all about, but Cecia wasn't offering much. There was another long pause. Jack couldn't take the silence anymore. You know, he started, trying to sound more relaxed. I'm not exactly sure what to say. I mean, this is all a bit unexpected. Cecia tilted her head slightly, studying him with a curious expression. Unexpected, she repeated. I suppose it is. For you, at least. Jack let out a nervous laugh. Yeah, you could say that. I didn't exactly plan on having an alien grandmother tell me I'm perfect for her granddaughter. I mean, I'm just a guy who fixes things. I'm not really, you know, royal or anything. Royal? Cecia raised an eyebrow. We do not consider ourselves royal in the same sense as you might expect. We Galacha are a people of intellect and culture, not of kings or queens. She paused, then added, but it is true that my family is highly respected, and my grandmother's judgment is rarely questioned. Jack nodded, trying to absorb what she was saying. He didn't know much about the Galacha, but he understood enough to know they weren't like humans. Their society was built around intellect and a deep sense of responsibility. So why, then, would Granddaughter choose him, a regular mechanic from a mining colony, as her granddaughter's mate? He couldn't figure it out, and based on Cecia's lack of enthusiasm, he wasn't sure she was happy about it either. The awkward silence stretched on again, and Jack could feel his palms starting to sweat. He shifted from one foot to the other, his mind racing for something, anything, to say that might break the tension. So, what do you like to do? He blurted out, regretting it the second the words left his mouth. Cecia didn't seem offended, but she looked at him like he had just asked her to solve an impossible puzzle. I enjoy studying the arts of diplomacy, the intricacies of different cultures, and analyzing the political systems of other species, she said coolly, as if reciting something she had memorized. I also spend time in the archives, researching the histories of the galaxy. It is an important part of my training. Jack blinked, feeling small and insignificant in comparison. Sounds interesting, he said, though he couldn't imagine how researching political systems or analyzing cultures could ever be fun. He was more comfortable with grease stains on his hands and the hum of mining equipment than talking about anything related to diplomacy or politics. Tell me, Cecia continued, her eyes narrowing slightly, do you ever feel the need to do more with your life? To achieve something greater than fixing machines and drones? Jack felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't an offensive question, but it was a question that made him feel, well, less than. Was she implying that fixing things wasn't enough? That he needed to be more like her, someone trained in diplomacy and politics, someone with grand aspirations? He opened his mouth to respond, but his words came out more quietly than he intended. I've never really thought about it like that, he said. I like what I do. I enjoy fixing things, making things work again. It's satisfying. Cecia was silent for a moment, as if considering his words. Jack couldn't read her expression. Was she judging him? Was she disappointed? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that the longer they stood there, the more awkward it felt. He had no idea how to connect with her. She was from a world so different from his own, and he had no idea how to find common ground. Before the silence could stretch any longer, Cesia spoke again, her voice softening just a little. "You are very different from what I imagined," she said, "but that is not necessarily a bad thing." Jack blinked, surprised by the admission. "What do you mean?" Cesia hesitated, then spoke again, her tone a little warmer. "You are honest, simple. You don't try to be anything you're not. That is rare, even among my people." Jack felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words. Was that a compliment? It seemed like one, but it was hard to tell. Still, it was the first real thing Cesia had said to him that didn't feel like an assessment or a test. "I guess that's just who I am," he said with a shrug. "I don't really know how to be anything else." Cesia studied him for a long moment, her gaze less cold now, but still distant. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "there is something to be learned from your simplicity, Jack Ellison. Perhaps there is more to you than I first realized." Jack felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this awkward meeting wasn't a complete disaster after all. Over the next few days, Jack tried to adjust to the strange new reality of having Cesia around. It was still difficult to wrap his mind around the fact that the granddaughter of Granddaughter, one of the most powerful and respected beings in the galaxy, had chosen him of all people, as her potential match. Cesia wasn't exactly what Jack would call warm, but she was present. She wasn't distant like when they first met, but she wasn't exactly friendly either. Their interactions were filled with pauses, awkward silences, and the occasional conversation about human culture, technology, or Galacha history. Jack tried his best to engage, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Cesia wasn't quite sure about him yet. It was one morning, while Jack was working on a piece of mining equipment in the station's maintenance bay, that Cesia approached him again. "Jack," she said, her voice breaking the silence as she stepped into the bay. Her eyes had softened slightly since their first meeting, but she still carried herself with an air of confidence that made Jack feel like he was being measured. "I've been thinking about your situation." Jack looked up from the drone's console, his brow furrowing in confusion. "My situation?" he repeated. Cesia nodded. "Yes. Your life. Your purpose. Your future." Jack couldn't help but laugh a little. "I guess I never thought of it that way. I'm just fixing drones and keeping things running around here. I'm not exactly living some grand adventure, if that's what you mean." Cecia's lips twitched, as if she found his comment amusing, though she didn't smile. "What if I told you that your role here isn't as insignificant as you think?" Jack's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Cecia walked closer, her steps quiet and calculated. She leaned against the side of the workbench, studying Jack carefully. "I have been observing you, Jack, and I believe you might be capable of more than you realize." Jack stared at her. Was she serious? He wasn't sure how to respond, but before he could think of anything, she spoke again. "You see, the Galacha are not just concerned with intelligence or power," she continued. "We value something else, something far more important than knowledge or strength. We value understanding. We value connection." Jack blinked. Connection. With who? Cecia's eyes locked with his, her gaze intense. "With everything. With people. With the world around you. With the universe itself." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. This was starting to sound like some kind of test, and if there was one thing Jack didn't want to do, it was fail a test he didn't even know was happening. "So, what do you want me to do?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Prove to me that you are more than just a mechanic," Cecia said softly, but her voice had a commanding edge. "I want to see that you understand the value of connection, that you are capable of more than just fixing machines." Jack was silent for a long moment, unsure how to even begin. He wasn't exactly good at showing people how he felt, much less making some grand philosophical point. His life had always been about simplicity. Fix what's broken, make things work again. But now Cecia was asking him for something he wasn't sure he could give. "I don't know how to do that," Jack said quietly. "I don't know how to show you that I'm anything more than what I am." Cecia's eyes softened a little, but she didn't smile. Instead, she stepped back and looked at him with a kind of quiet patience. I didn't expect you to know immediately, but I will help you understand. We have time. Jack was quiet for a moment, mulling over her words. Something in the way she said, "We have time," made it clear that she was not rushing him. And maybe, just maybe, that was a good sign. The next few days were spent in an odd kind of rhythm. Cecia didn't push Jack too hard, but she did start challenging him in small ways, asking questions about human culture, about his own life, and about the world he came from. They talked about Earth, about its history, and even about his childhood. Jack found himself sharing stories he'd never thought to tell anyone, his words coming more easily as Cecia listened with a quiet attentiveness. But what Jack found most surprising was how much he actually enjoyed these conversations. It wasn't that Cecia made him feel comfortable. She still had an air of formality that kept him on edge. But there was something about the way she listened, as if she was studying him, trying to understand the essence of who he was. And in a strange way, Jack began to feel like he wasn't just talking about himself for no reason. There was a purpose to these conversations. As the days went by, Jack started realizing that Cecia's strange request for connection was not a test in the way he had thought. It wasn't about performing some grand gesture to prove he was worthy of her attention. It was about being real, being honest. She wanted to see him not as a tool or as some means to an end, but as a person. She wanted to understand the way he thought, the way he felt, and how he saw the world. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something Jack was used to doing. But as he spent more time with Cecia, he started opening up in ways he never had before. He told her about the struggles he faced growing up on a small farm, about the dreams he once had of exploring the stars, and about the simple joy of fixing something that was broken. Cecia listened, nodding thoughtfully, but she never interrupted or judged. One evening, after a long conversation about human philosophy and the importance of community, Cecia surprised him by saying, "You see, Jack, this is why you have value. Not because of your skills, but because you are connected to the world around you. You understand the beauty of simplicity. That is something very rare." Jack felt a warmth spread through him at her words, but he wasn't sure how to respond. He wasn't used to being complimented, let alone praised for something as simple as his way of life. Before he could say anything, Cecia stood up and looked out at the stars through the station's observation window. "I think, Jack, that perhaps you will be more important in this decision than either of us initially realized." Jack's heart skipped a beat. What did that mean? And what kind of decision was she talking about? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just about being perfect for Cecia anymore. It was about something bigger, something neither of them fully understood yet, and for the first time since he had met her, Jack felt a small spark of hope. The days blurred together as Jack and Cecia continued their awkward dance of conversation. At first, Jack had been unsure of why she was pushing him to open up. But as time passed, he began to understand. It wasn't about impressing her. It was about showing her who he was, the real Jack. He started to feel like he wasn't just a test subject or an experiment. For the first time, he felt like he was being seen as a person, not a role to be filled. It wasn't easy. Talking about himself, his hopes, his past, felt like opening a door he had locked up for years. His life hadn't exactly been a fairy tale. He grew up on a small, isolated farm, where dreams of adventure were crushed by the harsh reality of survival. But he didn't mind it. He loved the simple life, working with his hands, fixing things, keeping his head down. It was enough, or at least, it had been. As the conversations continued, Jack started seeing Cecia in a new light. She wasn't just the poised granddaughter of Granddaughter, distant and cold. There were cracks in her exterior, moments when she dropped her guard, moments where Jack could see the uncertainty behind her eyes. Cecia was not the untouchable figure he had initially thought her to be. She had her own doubts, her own struggles, just like him. One evening, after an especially long discussion about human emotional connections, Jack found himself leaning against a wall in the station's break room. He hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it had slipped from his lips before he could stop himself. "Why are you even bothering with me, Kezia?" Jack asked, his voice quiet. "I'm not special. I'm just a guy who fixes things. I don't have anything to offer you." Kezia, who had been staring out of the station's large observation window at the distant stars, turned slowly to look at him. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief flash of vulnerability. It was gone in an instant, but Jack noticed it. She crossed the room toward him, her footsteps light and measured. "You think you are nothing more than a mechanic, Jack, but you are wrong." She stood close to him now, just a few feet apart, her gaze steady. "It is not your skills that make you valuable. It is your perspective, your understanding of life." Jack swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." Kezia's eyes softened, and for the first time, Jack saw the gentleness in them. "You see things differently. You have lived a life that is simple, yes, but it is a life grounded in reality. You understand what it means to build something from nothing, to fix what is broken. In our world, that is rare." Jack opened his mouth to argue, but Kezia raised a hand, silencing him. "You may not see it now," she said, her voice lower, "but what you have is exactly what I need." Her words hung in the air between them. Jack wasn't sure if he fully understood what she meant, but for the first time in their interactions, he felt like he had made some progress. Kezia had looked at him, really looked at him, and had seen something more than just the mechanic. It felt good, though Jack wasn't sure what to do with that feeling. Before he could respond, a soft beep from Kezia's communication device interrupted their moment. She glanced at it, her expression turning serious. "I must go," she said, her tone shifting back to its usual coolness. "I have a meeting with my grandmother." Jack nodded, though a part of him didn't want the conversation to end. "Right. I'll see you later then." Kezia paused at the door, glancing over her shoulder. "We are making progress, Jack. You are beginning to understand." As she left the room, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, something deep inside him. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but it was starting to feel like his life was no longer just about fixing machines. There was something bigger at play, and he wasn't sure whether it was Kezia's presence or the growing sense of connection between them, but he felt like he was finally beginning to understand what she meant. The next morning, Jack found himself back in the maintenance bay, doing what he did best, fixing things. But even as his hands worked mechanically, his mind wandered back to Kezia's words. What had she meant when she said he was starting to understand? Understand what? Was he becoming something else in her eyes? The door to the bay opened, and Jack didn't have to look up to know who it was. The sound of Kezia's footsteps was unmistakable, even if they were as soft as a whisper. "Good morning," she said, her voice more relaxed than usual. Jack gave her a quick nod but didn't stop working. "Hey, Kezia. What brings you here?" "I thought I would see how you're progressing with the drone repairs," she replied, "and perhaps talk some more." Jack paused, glancing over his shoulder. He was surprised by her interest. "Talk about what?" Kezia didn't immediately respond. She walked over to where he was working, her eyes scanning the scattered parts on the workbench. "Talk about the things you don't usually talk about. Your thoughts on life. Your hopes." Jack felt his face flush slightly. He wasn't used to discussing such things with anyone, let alone someone as serious and intelligent as Kezia. But there was something in her eyes, a kind of genuine curiosity that made him want to try. For the first time, he felt like Kezia wasn't just asking to pass the time. She was genuinely interested in him, his thoughts, his ideas. "Well," Jack began, taking a deep breath, "I guess I've always wanted more than just fixing drones and machines. But it's hard to think beyond what's right in front of me. I've always just done what I had to do to survive." Kezia's eyes were soft as she listened, and Jack found himself going on. "But the more I talk to you, The more I think, maybe there's more out there. Maybe I can make a difference. I don't know how, but I think I could do something bigger, something better. Cecia didn't interrupt, but when Jack finally stopped, she gave a small, thoughtful smile. You're beginning to understand, Jack. It is not about making the biggest impact or seeking fame. It is about the quiet moments, the connections you build along the way. That is what matters most. Jack didn't have an answer, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. What started as a strange matchmaking attempt had turned into something far deeper. Cecia had opened his eyes to a new way of thinking, and for the first time in years, Jack felt like he might actually be ready for more than just fixing broken drones. Maybe he wasn't meant to stay on his little corner of the universe forever. Maybe, just maybe, there was something greater waiting for him. Something he hadn't yet discovered. And now, with Cecia by his side, Jack was starting to believe he might find it. The weeks passed by with a strange sense of anticipation hanging over Station Zeta 15. Jack had spent countless hours in the maintenance bay, fixing drones and equipment, but now something inside him had changed. It wasn't just about repairing machines anymore. His conversations with Cecia had opened his eyes to a broader world, one he hadn't imagined existed before. He was starting to see his own life in a new light. More than just a simple mechanic, more than just someone who fixed things. He was beginning to believe that there could be something greater for him, something beyond the routine. Still, uncertainty gnawed at him. He wasn't sure what Cecia truly expected from him, or what her grandmother, Gratha, wanted in this unusual matchmaking situation. He had tried his best to engage with Cecia, to understand her world and her way of thinking. But despite their growing connection, a nagging feeling remained. Was he truly what Cecia needed, or was he simply someone who could fill a role in her life? It was early one morning, as Jack finished his latest repair job on a drone, that Cecia entered the bay again. This time, she didn't come to watch or ask questions about his work. She came to talk. "Jack," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of seriousness. "We need to discuss something important." Jack wiped his hands on a rag, his heart skipping a beat. The tone in her voice told him this wasn't going to be another casual conversation. "What's going on?" Cecia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "My grandmother is very pleased with the progress we've made. She believes you've come a long way, that you've grown. But there is something I need to understand. You have always focused on your work, your simplicity, and that is admirable. But I need to know, what do you want, Jack?" Jack stared at her, taken aback. "What do I want?" "Yes," Cecia said, her gaze unwavering. "What do you want for your future, for your life? You have shown me that you can grow beyond your role as a mechanic, but I need to know if you are truly ready for the challenges that come with that growth." Jack hesitated. What did he want? He had never really thought about it before. He had always done what was necessary to survive, to keep things running. But now, with Cecia asking him, he realized that he hadn't given his own desires much thought. "I don't know," Jack admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I guess I've always been so focused on just getting by that I never really stopped to think about what I could be, what I want to be." Cecia's eyes softened, and for a moment, she seemed almost understanding. "That is the first step, Jack. Admitting that you don't know is more than many people are willing to do. But now you must decide." Jack felt a sense of unease settle in his chest. "Decide what?" "Decide whether you want to stay where you are," Cecia said gently, "or whether you are willing to step into something greater. A life beyond the simple routine, beyond just surviving. A life that could change the course of your future. A life that could be important." Jack swallowed hard. The idea of stepping into something greater was both exciting and terrifying. He had spent his life in the shadows of others, never wanting to stand out or make waves. Now, Cecia was asking him to consider the possibility of a life that was bold, unknown, and full of challenges. "I don't know if I can," he said quietly, looking down at his hands. "I'm just a mechanic. I'm not meant for something bigger. I'm not like you." Cecia's expression was unreadable, but her voice remained calm and steady. You misunderstand, Jack. I'm not asking you to be like me. I'm asking you to be yourself, to see your own worth. It's not about being like anyone else. It's about understanding your own potential. Jack took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. He had never imagined a life like the one Cecia was describing. Could he really step out of his comfort zone and embrace something unknown? Something that could change the entire course of his life? Before he could answer, Cecia spoke again, her voice a little softer now. You are not just a mechanic. You are someone with a unique perspective on the world. You understand things in a way that no one else does. That is why my grandmother sees something in you. That is why I have come to see something in you. Jack felt a strange warmth spread through his chest at her words. It wasn't something he was used to, being seen, truly seen. But it felt good. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what Cecia was asking, but the thought of staying where he was, stuck in his old routine, didn't feel right anymore. Do you think I could be something more? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cecia's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something more, something deeper, in her gaze. I don't think. I know. Jack's heart raced in his chest, and for a moment, the weight of her words hung between them. Was this it? Was this the moment that would change everything? He wasn't sure, but he could feel something stirring inside him. A sense of possibility. A sense of potential he had never allowed himself to feel before. But how? Jack asked, his voice filled with doubt. How do I step into this life you're talking about? I don't even know where to begin. Cecia took a step closer, her voice low and reassuring. You begin by making a choice, Jack. A choice to embrace the unknown. A choice to step outside of your comfort zone and see what lies ahead. You are already on that path. The question is, are you willing to take the next step? Jack felt his stomach twist. This wasn't an easy decision, but in the depth of his heart, he knew that Cecia was right. If he didn't take this chance now, he might regret it for the rest of his life. He had spent so many years playing it safe, staying in the background, avoiding risks. But perhaps it was time to stop running from something bigger. Perhaps it was time to embrace the future, whatever it might be. He looked Cecia in the eyes, his voice steady despite the uncertainty he felt. I'm ready. I'll take the next step. Cecia smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. Good. You will not regret it. Jack didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, he felt like he was finally making a choice for himself, one that could change everything. It was no longer about just fixing machines. It was about fixing his life, finding his place in the galaxy, and understanding who he truly was. And with Cecia by his side, he was ready to take that step. The decision had been made. Jack didn't know where it would lead, but standing in that maintenance bay, with Cecia watching him closely, he realized something important. He was no longer the same person he had been when he first arrived at Station Zeta 15. He had changed. The weight of that realization made his heart beat faster, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt something that could only be described as hope. For days, he'd been wrestling with his feelings, unsure of what Cecia was asking of him, unsure of what he truly wanted. But now, with the decision made, he felt a strange kind of peace settling over him. He had taken the first step towards something greater, something beyond the walls of the station. Whatever lay ahead, Jack knew he wasn't alone. Cecia, though mysterious and distant at times, had become a guide, a beacon lighting the way forward. After he made his choice, things began to move quickly. Cecia wasted no time in preparing him for what came next. There was no going back now. Over the next few days, she took Jack under her wing, teaching him things he had never dreamed of learning. She helped him understand the intricacies of Galactic culture, its values, and its deep connection to the universe. Every lesson was a challenge, but also an opportunity. For the first time in his life, Jack felt like he was truly learning, not just for the sake of survival, but for the sake of understanding. Cecia's grandmother, Gratha, had heard about Jack's decision. She had been watching from a distance, and while Jack still hadn't met her face to face, he felt her presence looming over everything. Gratha was a legend, a being of immense power and wisdom. There was no question that the stakes were high. This wasn't just about Jack's future, it was about the future of something much larger. He could sense it, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. As the days passed, Jack's life began to take on a rhythm. Cecia continued to guide him, and Jack worked tirelessly to learn and grow. He was becoming more than just a mechanic. He was becoming something else, someone capable of understanding the vastness of the galaxy, of seeing the connections that tied everything together. One afternoon, Cecia came to him with a new task. It was one of the most difficult challenges she had given him so far, but Jack knew it was necessary. "Jack," she said, her voice steady but serious, "there is a mission I need you to prepare for. It will test everything you've learned. Are you ready?" Jack looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. What kind of mission? Cecia's gaze didn't falter. It's a diplomatic mission, one that requires not just intelligence, but understanding. You will need to negotiate with a species that is very different from humans or the Galacha. The stakes are high, and failure is not an option. Jack swallowed hard. He had always been good at fixing things, machines, drones, whatever was broken. But negotiating, especially with an unknown species, was something he had never done before. The thought of it made him nervous, but he could see the resolve in Cecia's eyes. She believed in him, and that was enough to give him the courage to try. "I'm ready," Jack said, his voice more confident than he felt. Cecia nodded approvingly. "Good. You've come a long way, Jack. I believe you can do this." They spent the next few days preparing. Cecia gave Jack all the information he needed about the species they would be meeting, their culture, their values, and the challenges they faced. Jack had always thought of himself as a simple man, but now he was learning how to navigate the complexities of the universe. The more he learned, the more he realized how much there was still to discover. The day of the mission arrived, and Jack stood with Cecia at the shuttle bay, ready to depart. His nerves were a storm inside him, but he tried to hide it. This was a new beginning, a new chapter in his life. "Are you sure about this?" Cecia asked, her voice softer than usual. She was looking at him, almost as if she were reading his thoughts. Jack met her gaze, feeling the weight of her question. "I'm sure. This is my chance to prove that I'm more than just someone who fixes things. I can do this. I will do this." Cecia's lips curved into a small, approving smile. "Then go, Jack. Show them what you're capable of." With that, Jack stepped onto the shuttle, Cecia by his side. The doors closed, and the ship hummed to life. As they ascended into space, Jack looked out the window, seeing the stars ahead. The galaxy was vast, full of mysteries and challenges, and for the first time, he felt like he was ready to face them. The journey to the diplomatic meeting was long, and Jack spent most of the time studying the data Cecia had provided. He knew the importance of this mission. If he failed, it could mean disaster not just for him, but for the entire station, and possibly even the relationships between the Galacha and this unknown species. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but Jack wasn't going to back down. When they arrived at their destination, Jack's heart raced as the shuttle landed. They were on an alien world, one that was nothing like Earth or any of the places he had been before. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar plants, and the landscape was strange and beautiful in a way he couldn't describe. A delegation from the species they were meeting with awaited them. Jack could feel their eyes on him, studying him. This was it, the moment that would define him. Cecia turned to him, her expression serious. "Remember, Jack, it's not about winning or losing. It's about understanding. Listen, learn, and find common ground. You have everything you need. Just trust yourself." Jack nodded, his nerves steadying as he took in her words. He stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider. He didn't feel like just a mechanic. He was Jack, a person with a purpose, a person who understood the importance of connection. As he approached the delegation, he took a deep breath, ready to begin this new chapter of his life. No matter what happened next, Jack knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning, and he was ready for it.